Okay. Hello. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the City Council Subcommittee for Water Issues together this morning on the
Water and sewer connection.
I was given the wrong one. I have the wrong one. Okay, I'm at a different one. Thank you.
I heard you say that, I was like,
Okay, I can start that over. Hello, we're here, the Mayor's Commission on Water and Sewer Connection Agenda. Today is Tuesday, October 20th, 2020, 9:35 roughly a.m. and we are on Zoom and we have a quorum, I assume. And are you going to take us through what we need to know?
we need a roll call.
Okay, let's do a roll call.
Councilman Blair,
Here,
Mayor, here, Mark Natupsky, one who's in and also is on, Millie Ellis, here, Mary Hannah, here, Jim Hazelbaker is on Zoom right now, Michael Breen is on Zoom right now. And Sam is-
Here, I'm here.
Here.
Mike Breen here.
got a lot of here's.
How are you here?
Jim's here.
Okay.
So just a reminder, raise your hand to get the floor from Councilman Blair to speak. That way we can invite the Zoom members, and I'll raise my hand for the Zoom members.
Okay, thank you. Once again, I think I want to point out that the mission statement for us all is to complete a comprehensive policy for implementation of a sewer service expansion program. And the goals are to reduce the pollutants from the streams and Watson and Will reservoirs and increase recharge to our aquifer. So I think we always need to keep that in mind. That's why we're here. We've been trying to do this for 20 years. It's becoming more and more important to recharge water. It's becoming more and more evident that our reservoirs are being heavily used for recreation. AEQ has qualified those both as endangered species on the list of not being water quality for human connection. So we need to start doing something in this community, and this is part of why we're here. And the people that are on this committee have knowledge or live in areas that do not have septic, or sewer. They have septic, as well as people that are just interested in general in helping the city, like Sandy and Mark Natupsky and others, to get a policy together that we can all live by. So with that said, I'm going to ask for approval of minutes of September 12th, 2020. If somebody would like to make a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Councilman,
Yes, ma'am.
I sent a notice to Carrie.
Okay.
Millie had a couple of updates to the minutes and a couple of suggestions that I've not been able to complete yet.
Okay.
So I can send them out to the group and we can approve the minutes at the next meeting.
So we want the minutes for this
We will
meeting, the
skip
12th, at the
minutes.
next meeting.
Correct.
Okay. All righty. So we'll move past C and we'll go to draft connection policy review and discussion. And when are you going to do that for us?
It's my lucky day.
All right. Bingo.
So I'm Gwen Roach with the Prescott Public Works Department. And this morning, we're going to go over, and we sent this out to the commissioners, but this morning we're going to go over, staff has created 6 policy statements that we hope will help us to form the framework of our new policy for connecting parcels, not only existing homes, but new homes or new unconstructed parcels to the city sewer system in the future. And I also would just, before we go through the 6 policies, would just like to let the commission know that at the next meeting, we're going to talk about policy statements related to the financing of how we're going to pay for this, because that's always the biggest question that we have of this commission and of the public is, well, it's all good that we want to connect as many people as possible, but how are we going to pay for that? So I don't want you to feel like we've discounted that or dismissed that in any way, but that is a topic for an entire meeting. And we are going to bring that back to you in November the financing options that we have come up with and seek input from the commission on those at the November meeting. So today we're going to focus on the policy itself and the circumstances under which connection to sewer should happen. There are a couple of categories for this, and the first category is obviously new home construction. When new homes are built and the sewer is adjacent or abutting the property. So the first policy statement that's being suggested is that a new home that receives city water will connect to an existing sewer. In other words, the sewer is already fronting or abutting the property when the home is built if the sewer main is adjacent and abutting the property. Now, this requirement is already in city code. It's in city code chapter 2. It says that if a new construction commences, that if the sewer is adjacent and abutting, that you must tie into the sewer. So we thought it would be helpful to start the discussion with the commission for each policy statement if we have some pros and cons to kind of kick around. And the staff is also open to any additional pros and cons that you would like us to add to the list, because these are the items that we're going to be forwarding on to the council as a whole for their consideration of the new policy. So under the new home receiving water connecting to an existing main, the pros are that new construction would be treated the same as any other new construction within the city. And currently, any water service agreement that we write today is required to connect to sewer. And that requirement has actually been in place for several years. So I would say we probably have about 5 to 7 years of water service agreements that say if you receive water and there's sewer near you, or in some cases, if there's not sewer near you, you have to extend it. But in order to receive water, you must tie a sewer. Also, the sewer main is already there. So the cost to construct a sewer main next to the property is no longer needed because the sewer main is there. So this would be a pro that the only cost for these, in these instances, would be the cost for the home to actually connect to the sewer. And then finally, of course, it meets one of our goals of the commission, or both of our goals of the commission, which is to recharge the aquifer and protect the environment. So before I move on to the next policy statement, I'd just like to open it up to the commissioners if they have any comments they'd like to make or any additional pros and cons they'd like to have.
Any comments, anyone? Yes, go ahead.
Under this existing, as long as the sewer main is there, the new home can just not have to incur any additional expenses other than hooking it up.
That's correct. They would incur the same expenses as any other new home in the city where the sewer main fronted the property. It would be
Yes, go ahead, Sherry.
If you're wanting to hook up to the water and the connection is close or far, is there a flat fee for that, or do you charge to hook up? How do you charge for that, by the foot, or if it's not close to the proximity of the home being built?
so one of the policies down the list is when the main is not directly adjacent and abutting. So if I could maybe postpone that question until we get to that one.
Thank you, Chairman Quinn. Is it possible that this new home construction not only could hook up to sewer, but that the lot could also take on a septic? And where I'm going with that question is, I'm assuming that some of these new home construction, new builds, are individually parceled lots, not necessarily in a big development taking place. So what are we going to do if the lot is conducive to septic and sewer, and we have a main running adjacent to the lot? How do we communicate and what do we do to the real estate industry to help them help their buyer understand what the rules and regulations are? Dear buyer, even though septic could go on this lot, you are required to hook up to sewer.
That's the policy. That's the whole reason why we're here.
I know, but how do we define that here?
Code, right?
So it is in the city. So in this particular, for this policy statement, The sewer main is adjacent and abutting the property. Therefore, connection should be fairly straightforward in terms of the sewer main is there. I think maybe you're inferring some, and I'm correct me, you're inferring that there may be parcels that don't directly abut the sewer main, where the sewer main may be a distance from a parcel that's not in an organized subdivision type development. Maybe it's a result of a lot split or something to that effect. Is that what you're?
Yes, but I know for a fact we have lots where we have sewer mains abutting the lot, but the lot can also have a septic tank put on it.
And I think Councilman Blair is correct. I think that's the purpose of writing the policy, so that the direction is clear to new development. When they front a sewer main, they must tie to the sewer main, that septic is no longer an option.
So then again, for us doing outreach and education, we have to be careful that those realtors and the people selling those lots and the contractors building on them know that it's sewer.
Yes, ma'am. That's correct.
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
Okay, there's a new subdivision or homes being built off of the west end of Green Lane. I think the Orthodox Church sold the property. Don't see, it's a new subdivision that's gonna go in, but what happens since the sewer main may or may not go that far? Will they put in brand new septic tanks and then have to join the sewer shortly thereafter?
So for subdivision development, we do have a different set of criteria for subdivided parcels. And in order to receive water, they must tie to sewer. So it would require them to extend a sewer main and do what we call an offsite improvement in order to serve their development. That's actually very common in the process of establishing a new subdivision.
Okay, what happens if they're sold not as a subdivision, but individual lots?
So that's what we're going to talk about in some of the subsequent policies. So this first policy is simply a new home that has a sewer main adjacent or abutting it, that they are required to tie into the sewer. Are we ready to go to the next policy?
I have a hand up.
Sorry. Hand up.
Go ahead.
Mike Breen, I'm a realtor, and realtors have to, in their listing, indicate what services are available to the property. And I think that if the realtors could be informed just to make sure they have accurate maps. So when they're listing a property, they could indicate in the notes to the realtor what's needed to be done in terms of having a connection to the sewer. There's like 833 properties for sale right now that are lots in Prescott. So, and most of them, if you look at them, I looked at some today, they usually tell you whether a sewer's available, water's available, et cetera. So that could be accomplished with information to the real estate industry, just to make sure that they know that facts before they list their properties.
Mr. Green?
Yes.
Do you know of any sewer connections on Monty Road off of Pulliam Lane?
If you sent me an email, I could look it up on and I could get back to you on that. I could look it up on real estate on my site. So
There's some open land going up to the water towers. And
I'm not familiar with every parcel in the city, but they can be looked up and look at other properties in the area and see if they're on sewer or septic.
okay, because those are advertised incorrectly in the past.
Okay.
That's what I'm afraid of with Mr. Green's assumption.
Well, again, that's us to make sure the real estate world knows, but it's not me that guide the real estate of what they decide to choose to sell tell their buyers. As far as I'm concerned, we have to have a policy that's clear and concise, and that's what we're working on here. So there's no question about what we're trying to do as a city. And then those policies should be forwarded on to the Board of Realtors so they understand. Once,
And the realtors have to, anything they know about the value of the property has to be transmitted. So if there's something in terms of a sewer connection and fees, that would have to be, if the realtors know, it's their fiduciary responsibility to pass that on.
and thank you for that. I think you're absolutely correct. So once we work through all these policies and they move from this committee to the council for review and ultimate approval by the council, if that happens, then the real estate world needs to know, along with everybody else, what our new policies are. Okay, go ahead.
Are there any other hands raised, Karen?
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Mark does have a,
Oh, I'm sorry. Mark had his hand raised.
yes.
Mark, go ahead. Hello, Mark.
Give him just a minute to unmute.
Okay.
I'm just trying,
Go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I'm a little bit late this morning. I apologize.
That's right. When you're retired, you sleep in.
It's technical issues I'm not trained in. Thank you, though.
You had a question?
No, I just wanted to let you know I was here.
Okay. Well, good to have you aboard, and thank you for being there and letting us know. And we'll move on to the next item there, Gwen.
Thank you.
So the second policy is a statement that came out of the questionnaire on whether financial hardships would be considered for new homes. So the policy would read, financial hardships will not be considered that would exempt a new home from connecting to sewer when it is adjacent and abutting the sewer main.
Right.
The pros of that are that all new construction going forward would be connected to sewer, with the cost paid upfront as part of the construction of the home. And that's something that Mark Woodfield talked about last month in his financial overview, is that generally when the developer builds his subdivision, he puts in the sewer mains as part of the construction of the new home. The cons to this policy would be that it may cost more than septic to connect. It may cost more to connect to the sewer than it does to the septic, but that doesn't meet the goal of the community that we've set for connection to sewer. Are there any comments on the second policy?
Go ahead, Sandy.
Thank you, Chairman. I almost see that policy number 2 should be combined with policy number 1.
Which we can do.
I mean, it doesn't make sense to me to have a separate policy number 2 when it's talking about number 1 as well, so.
I would agree. If that's the direction we're going to go in for new construction, then
And there it is.
this is what it's going to be.
Perfect.
So the simpler we make it, the better off we are.
We're
So
better off to implement it.
I would agree with that. Anybody else?
Any hands raised? Okay,
Okay.
and I'll go on to the third policy statement. So now we're gonna switch away from new home construction. Oh, I apologize. We're still in new homes construction, where the sewer main is not adjacent or abutting the property. So the third policy statement is when a new home receiving city water is not adjacent or abutting the sewer main, the property owner will be required to extend the sewer main a distance that is comparable to the cost of installing a septic system. So in other words, the cost to extend the main would be no more than it would cost the applicant to install a septic system. Now, the reason we didn't put a specific,
Should we change the wording to an alternative system?
so the reason we didn't put a specific distance in is because we know there are different types of septic systems, including alternative systems, which can be quite costly. And so those would be considered on an individual basis by the Public Works Director We, as a city, install new sewer main frequently. And so we know what the cost of extending mains is within the Public Works Department. It also can vary over time. Material costs can vary, different contractor costs can vary. So we do have recent bid tabs on a regular basis where we can look at a request and make a determination if it would be a fair and equitable cost to extend the main versus installing a septic tank or an alternative septic system. So some of the pros of this policy are that the city can what's called a reimbursement district. And reimbursement districts are set up so that the person who installs a sewer main has an opportunity to receive some of those costs back to them if others connect to the sewer along the way that they installed. And those reimbursements can happen for up to a 15-year period. So in the case of the example that Sandy threw out, you have maybe a parcel that was developed by lot split or something like that. If one person were to extend the main, then others could potentially connect to it. And the person that extended the main could recoup some of their costs for doing so.
Go ahead.
Should we put a percentage on the cost or just leave it open?
When a district is formed, the percentage of the cost is determined at the time that it's formed. It's shared equitably amongst those who may benefit from it. The other pro is that the cost would be comparable to a septic tank installation, hence removing the financial hardship argument. Some of the cons would be that the city would have an agreement or some sort of intergovernmental agreement with Yavapai County regarding the issuance of septic permits. Questions?
Go ahead, Sandy.
Thank you, Chairman. There's just not a one size fits all for the cost of installing a septic system. And there are costs involved to figure out what type of septic system would need to be installed on a particular lot. So we're asking the homeowner to spend money to figure out what the cost is of a septic system and apply it to installing sewer. So I think policy 3 needs some rework, and I don't know where to go and how to make that happen. But it's just not an easy 1, 2, 3 to go out and get a cost for a septic system installation. Plus, not everybody's cost of doing business is the same.
I think that's hence why you suggested it be looked at individually by the Public Works Director, because knowing what types of materials are in the property, I'm not sure, maybe I'm wrong, but most contractors that I know that work within the world of putting in a septic system, they have to give the homeowner a cost, and they don't charge them for that estimate. So they would know up front, and that we as the Public Works Department would know, generally speaking, the cost of a linear foot of putting in a main extension, would we not?
Yes.
And then it would be pretty easy to evaluate which was cheaper than the other. Okay. Yes, Jane.
Well, I guess I'm just wondering where this is all going. If we're trying to eliminate septic systems, is that correct?
That's what we're here for.
Why are we offering an alternative to new homes to put in a septic system?
That I would defer to Mr. Palladini. I know that because there's probably some legalities to the state and the county that when you have a piece of property that is a buildable, sellable lot, there's going to be some rules and regulations, I think, tied into if the water is available, whether the city has the ability to give them water with an alternate system. And that's what we've been struggling with here in the city of Prescott. You know, we got lots of meets and bounds areas in the county that just because there's a line drawn in the sand that says city limits does not necessarily mean the guy that owns the property just outside the city limits can't build his dream home because we're not going to let him. So
We're talking about in or out of city.
We are talking about in or out of city, where the city is the water provider.
okay.
So,
Thank you for the clarity.
so with that clarification, the city would be in its rights to say, we're not gonna issue a building permit unless you A, extend water, and B, extend sewer. I don't care how long it is. I mean, that's the.
Okay.
Obviously, with a subdivision platting process, we even have that authority even is sort of magnified, because we can just say we're not gonna approve the subdivision plat unless you extend water and sewer, and then water and sewer, all of your lots in there, whether they're custom built or whether they're mass production homes. I think what the policy is trying to do is reach a sort of middle ground. So it's not the sort of draconian rule that says if you have some lot split parcel up off of, above Prescott Lakes or wherever those lots are, and you want to go to the end of the road, and the sewer goes to the corner, and there's no building between you, we may say, well, we want you to extend that sewer, and over the next 15 years, when the houses between your house and the corner build, you'll get reimbursed for the pro rata share of that. So that's one way of accomplishing that. I don't think as policymakers, this council or future councils would go the draconian route and say, if you want to build in this city, you have to connect to water and sewer regardless of its location, and it's your cost to extend. Because that would be pretty extreme on an individual homeowner versus or home builder, an individual lot versus say a subdivision 6 or more parcels. So we do have that, but I think what these policies are trying to do is reach some sort of middle ground. But I would caution you on things is, once you hear these policies and you start chipping away and going, well, we should have this exception and this exception and this exception, ultimately the exception swallows the rule and you have no rule. So I think you have to be careful about that. I get where everybody has their sort of, the theme of this has been quite often, whose ox is being gored. And so, well, we can't affect my subdivision, or we can't affect my constituents, or we can't, and at some point, you don't achieve anything. So I think be careful when you go through that. But yeah, the city would have that authority. When I was in Sedona, it mandated sewer connections and on everything, and shut down septic tanks, and it cost. And there was some hardship financing that the city provided, but everybody was ultimately mandated, and that came through an ADEQ court order because of septics reaching into the creek. I think so. We don't have necessarily that bad of a problem, but as we've talked about, the lakes are reflective in large part due to septic tanks that aren't working properly or even failing. So we do have sort of a broader policy goal to achieve the reduction in the number of existing septic tanks, but I think these policies are talking about not putting in new ones, because if you do nothing on the existing septic tanks, and you basically prevent as best you can new septic tanks, you've achieved a lot in this. Doing the existing ones is a whole other elephant you're gonna have to eat.
Well, thank you for that. And as I sit here and listen to that, I understand that if all of a sudden the public works director makes a determination that maybe a septic system is a lot cheaper than a sanitary sewer, aren't we going to go that direction? If we do, is it going to be written in the policy when a sewer becomes available, then they have to dismantle
So that's policy number 4.
Okay.
That's the next one we're coming up on.
Let me also just make a comment on this policy. I think we have to reflect, I think we do have to refine it a bit, because we have this issue, we see this issue with wells, where there's a state law that says if I can put in a well cheaper than it costs me to hook to city sewer, and that includes impact fees, that I have the right to put in a well. And then you get these fake estimates from well drillers that say it's $1,500 to drill this well, to go down 300 feet, which we all know is not accurate, which we use a different term.
Legally correct.
Yeah. So I think we have to kind of, when we do this policy, we have to kind of refine it to allow the city to get its own estimate from its own independent sort of consultant to say, no, that estimate, that septic tank estimate is way low. Because there are, again, I'm not trying to disparage anybody, but again, if a well driller or a septic tank subcontractor can get that job, they may provide a lowball estimate for city purposes to say, yeah, we can go ahead. We're underneath the threshold for what it costs to attach this, to connect the city sewer, and therefore we get to do the septic tank work. So I think we need to be able to put in this policy that the city can check that and say, well, we don't think that's an accurate number, and we're gonna get our own estimate. And if our estimate says that this estimate is we, in the bidding process, they call it an unbalanced bid. If it's so artificial, if it's essentially fraudulent, and again, not disparaging anybody, but we have seen well estimates when it comes to hooking to water that are ridiculously below what it actually would cost to go down 200-300 feet. So we've seen that, and we've tried to fight it. Unfortunately, with well, there's not a whole lot we can do, but I think with the sewer connection issue, we have a lot more control over it.
Yes, Millie.
Mr. Palladini, on the septic tanks, per the zoning allowance, the grade of each lot is also considered, correct?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but I would defer.
We don't permit septic tanks here.
County does.
It's done through the Yavapai County, that's correct.
So even if the house is built in the city and they can't connect to sewer, they have to go get a county permit, a county health department permit, a health department
That's correct.
that regulates the installation and operation of septic tanks.
Right, and that's where the grade of the lot comes.
I'll defer to these guys.
Again, because we don't, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay,
what
bring
the
us back to
regulations
now bring us back to reality.
All right, so policy number 4, should we move on? Is there any other comments from hands
I have
online?
not anymore.
Okay, all right, then we're gonna move on
Millie,
to,
go ahead.
Can you clarify an IGA?
it's an intergovernmental agreement. So it's a contractual agreement between 2 governmental agencies. So that would, because septic tanks are regulated through Yavapai County, the city would enter into an agreement with Yavapai County about when they would issue septic tank permits and when they would not.
Okay, thank you.
So policy number 4, and this might answer some of the questions from policy number 3. When a new home receiving city water is not adjacent and abutting a sewer main, and a main extension exceeds the comparable septic system cost, so in other words, the cost of a main would be more than installing a septic system, then a septic system may be constructed with approval of the Public Works Director. In that case, the owner shall sign and the city shall record in the office of the Yavapai County Recorder Office an instrument requiring abandonment of the septic system and connection to any new sewer that is adjacent and abutting the property at the completion of new sewer construction, regardless of the age of the septic system. So in other words, installation of a septic system would not be a guarantee into the future if the city were to come into that area and install sewer mains. The pros of that particular policy are that the city does develop a 5-year capital improvement plan. And in truth, we look at capital improvement plans as far out as 20 years in some cases, which would include new sewer pipes in unsewered areas. This information can be shared with applicants who are requesting to use a septic tank because it has to be approved by the City Public Works Department, so that they can be informed as early as possible of the requirement of a future connection, so they can be educated about the decision that they are making to connect to a septic tank. The other pro is that recorded documents will be used to disclose to potential new property owners in the future that a sewer connection requirement may be there. This would go back to the realtor's questions of how do we know? This document would come up in a title search. The other pro is that it meets the goal of this commission, which is to recharge the aquifer to the extent possible and protect the environment, because these parcels will eventually connect to the sewer in the future. They may not tie in at the time that they build, but at some point in the future, there's the possibility that they will connect. Some of the cons to this policy are that new homes that are built now that are not on sewer may have to abandon a newer septic system, which would increase their overall cost to the homeowner. Another con is that enforcement of the recorded document for required connections. It's always easy to say things in code and policy, but the enforcement and the execution of that is not always as simple as it may seem. So that could potentially be a con.
Any questions, anybody?
Questions or comments on this particular policy statement?
Go ahead, Sandy. I knew it.
That's why we're here, to keep it around, right?
I'm okay with the first part of this policy, but the second part where we are hamstringing a potential taxpayer and requiring them to abandon a septic system, which can cost quite a bit of money. They're not $5,000. They're 25, some of them are $30,000. I don't feel that that is a positive benefit, and we are just acting like big government trying to take control. And I know recharging the aquifer is extremely important, but I would like to have us think of another way to do this without a homeowner having to spend thousands of dollars. And we all know that our 5-year capital improvement plans don't always come to the surface.
I gotta say that we'll go back to the mission statement of why we're here.
I know, I get it.
And I understand your big government thing, I do. But at some point in time, there's no gray area. Either they do or they don't. And it's gonna be a cost to somebody in the end, and I don't know how to get around that. You have a hand over there, you say?
Not any longer.
Okay, so I think we have to go back and say, what is our objective? And we know what the objective is. And so if it's written that a sewer up front, that a sewer comes in front of your house, you have to hook up to it. There might be a period of time that we give them to do that, whether it's 1 year or something, so that they don't have a $5,000 bill on their doorstep the day the sewer trench goes in place. I think is a fair request. Maybe a year would be a good time so they can figure out their financing, or maybe even the city to help them with that financing as far as how long. So I think that's probably a thing. Yes, sure.
You're right, and I think better incentives, I know we talked about that, giving incentives to people to do that, or that they're comparable to their budget, what
Correct.
they do, making it easier for them to do that.
Well, I think if we're going to reach our mission statement here to take people off, we got to have some flexibility a little bit from the city when it comes to financial. And I think if we have a plan, and that'll come in the financial part of it with Mr. Mark back there. But I think that is part of something that we have to look at. The ultimate goal to remove them from the septic is why we're here. We just have to figure out, oh, here it comes.
I'm actually not going to discourage Sandy, so. Figured I'm not talking. I think what I would suggest is that before you get into the sort of, again, creating exceptions and conditions, is this agree or whatever, approve the policy? And if this becomes this policy is a very broad, high level, 30,000 foot concept, then if the council then approves the policies, then we go back and we start with direction, start refining those, creating the 1 year, the 18 months, within 2 years. So if it, determine like up front, is this policy is up or down, kind of as is a little bit. And then we can go and refine those as it goes through the process. Because ultimately this is going to be set out in city code. So as an ordinance and then codified in city code. So if this is a policy that you think is the right direction, then kind of proceed with it. And I get your concerns and objections and conditions that you want to impose, but first determine, is this the right direction? If that's the right direction, and then as it gets refined, ultimately into city code, we can put those things in your comments certainly can be on the record, but don't kind of hold up the policy unless this is bad policy, don't do it.
So is there anybody out there that disagrees with the framework of this item? In general, I think it's very good framework. That's why we're here.
Well,
Yeah, go ahead, Molly.
okay. Mr. Palladini, you explained in the overall meeting of Public Works, you said sometimes the policies are already formed and the commission perhaps might not be anything but a rubber stamp. That was paraphrased, excuse me. Yes, but that was the
Is that what you heard me
implication.
say? 'Cause that was
Yes.
clearly not, no, I'm saying, do you like this policy? Meaning, this is a 30,000-foot look at this is the direction the city should go. Or not,
Adequate.
if it's.
Yes.
And then if it's yes, then it gets along, and you know, obviously you have your comments and concerns, then those are on the record, then the policies go to the council from here. Those policies are then either voted sort of up or down with, again, comments and concerns and conditions and exceptions sort of suggested. Then if those policies then are supported by the council, then it goes back to becoming codified in city code by way of an ordinance. And that's where all those comments, concerns, conditions, exceptions then get put in writing. So I guess what I'm saying is if you get hung up on, well, what about this, or what about that, or what about this neighborhood, you're never going to get through the policy. So I'm not in any way, shape, or form suggesting that this is a rubber stamp. I know Councilman Blair well enough to know that nothing's ever rubber stamped by council.
That's exactly right. Yes.
And
I have two hands. One is a member and one is the public. How do you want to handle public?
Let's handle the member first and then take the public second.
Mike,
this is Mike Breen again. Just in terms of like the big policy, the over.
Mike, you cut out. Can you start over?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
With the I was checking with the county, and they're in the county development services. They're actually permitting new septics at a rate of 700 to 1,000 a year. So that's a lot of new construction that you're going to have to deal with this policy. I would tend to not want to deal with over 5 years, 5,000 people dealing with this. I think it's something that the fact that there's 70,000 septic systems in Yavapai County, adding these extra new homes, I think is not necessarily, I mean, even an overall reaching policy of saving the aquifer, when you have 70,000 septic systems feeding into the aquifer already, it seems like a small attainment to battle with 700 to 1,000 people a year over every year.
We're only dealing with the city of Prescott. If that's countywide.
Yeah, we're not dealing countywide, Michael.
Right, I know, but they're still all the water is in the same aquifer. It's not like it's a different aquifer unless it's solved on a county basis. The city solving their portion of it doesn't do much good.
Well, yeah, but we can't have that attitude, or PSPRS wouldn't have been paid off either if we wait for the state to make, a determination of how to fix something. We got to take our own bull by the horns and do it ourselves, or we won't ever get anything done.
Right, yeah, that would come up when you're asking the people of Prescott to take the bull by the horn, especially property owners, to pay for it when it's a countywide problem. That's where I will always go with this, but I'm here to listen.
But ultimately, I will argue the fact that a sanitary sewer system probably brings more value to the property than a septic system does. So,
well, I've done research on that also, and on the appraiser world, and there's a lot of that isn't a set opinion across the industry in terms of value for especially new construction. Yes, conversions. There's a lot of debate.
And I think what we're trying to do once again is to go back to the original policy statement here of why we have everybody on this committee, is to take out the septic systems. And we need to keep going back to that and not look at the state or the county as a whole, we got to look at our own jurisdiction. So.
Well, I know the objective. I thought the objective was to, I mean, that's an objective to be discussed, not predetermined.
Right, but I think ultimately, when we end up shutting the lakes down because of sewer hazard, we would probably look back and say we should have done more. So I think it's very clear that we're here and spending our time trying to make a difference, and I think that's the focus. Who from the public? Okay. Howard, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
I want to go back to number 3 a little bit. Let's say somebody comes in and says, well, the septic's going to cost me $20,000. The city sewer is going to cost $23,000. So I'm going to septic. I think the city, we've discussed before that the city is probably going to be providing some financial incentives, including possible subsidies. So I think in that case, that specific case, it shouldn't be up to the homeowner to say, I'm going to septic. The city should have the option of providing a subsidy if it wants to. If it's in the public interest to provide $3,000 for this individual case, which I think in many cases, it is in the public interest to spend public funds to avoid that septic and for this public to obtain that effluent. So that's what I'm suggesting for that to be considered as an option for that. And
we will make note of that and do some discussion on it as we move forward.
okay, appreciate that. And also, as far as what Mike brought up about 70,000 septic systems or thousands of new ones, as you mentioned, Steve, that we're talking about the city limits right now, and maybe the Public Works can look and see in policy number 4, what would be your projections about the number of people? We're talking about future people who are extending, who are putting in septics, and later on there's going to be a sewer in that area. I don't think right now that there's going to be a lot of those cases in the city. Maybe I'm wrong, but it's probably, you know, if it's a couple hundred, I think it's going to be.
Well, as this policy, Howard, it looks at the water connections in the county too. So it's not just about the city. When you look at some place like Hoke, 400 and some houses that are on city water, and you know they're failing systems because they're all in rock and all kinds of different materials out there that run right directly into Willow Creek. There may be a time that the city puts a sanitary sewer through there, and those folks are going to have to hook up.
Okay, but this policy number 4 talks about a new home. You're talking about existing homes there in Hohokam. So that's for new homes. So how many new homes are going to be connected to sewer in that area? Maybe there should be some kind of estimate so we know what we're talking about here. Are we talking about thousands and thousands of potential new homes that are going to put in septic and later on they're going to have a sewer option, or are we talking about a few hundred?
Go ahead, Craig.
So some of the work that we've been doing and looking at our entire water service area, including within the city limits, as well as within the county. We have a differential between parcels that are served with water today that are not on septic versus available parcels. We have a difference of about 250 to 300. So there's about 250 to 300 parcels that have the ability for water service that would have the potential of being on septics. So we don't have a very large number within the service area that we're looking at, to give us an idea from that perspective.
Thank you. Thank you, Howard. Yes, Millie.
He mentioned the city, or you did, about bringing it into Hohokam or any subdivision. if the sewer line that is brought into subdivisions are paid for by the city and property owners only have to hook up, would that be a lot less expensive than doing everything per property owner?
It would be considerably less, yes. And we'll be talking about that in the financial piece in November.
Okay, yes.
I believe Jim Hazelbaker has a question.
Oh, good. Jim, I thought maybe you were sleeping.
No, sir, I've been punching this button trying to get in there.
Okay, well, you're in here now. How are you?
I am well, young man. How are you?
I am very good. I'm glad you're there. What's your question?
I don't know whether I brought a piece of paper or I brought 3 sheets in to carry to make prints off of for the council. I don't know if she got it through legal or not.
Jim Hazelbaker's
Give us 1 minute.
Sure.
legislation that you reviewed last week.
Oh, I gotta refresh my memory. I don't remember it. Do you have it?
I do not.
Didn't print it out.
Can we hold off on that until the next meeting then?
Well, let me bring you up to date on it, okay?
Jim, we do
The city
have-
attorney is,
So go ahead and ask your question again. I'm sorry.
Is it all right if I talk about it?
yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. According to the state legislature, when you annex a piece of property or you annex a subdivision or property into the city, you have 10 years to provide all city services, all 5 city services. I think a whole lot of these problems would have been waylaid from the very beginning if the city sewer, the water, trash, police, fire was provided in these subdivisions prior to or within 10 years of annexation. There wouldn't be a discussion now about whether you're going to sewer an area or not. It'd already be sewered when the water goes in. And you would people would have hooked up to the sewer then. To come back now, in my case, 30 some years later and say, well, we're going to run a sewer up there through North Prescott and you're going to have to hook into it or else. To me, it seems kind of unfair. If the city would have done what they were supposed to do at that time when the property was annexed, we wouldn't be sitting here talking about this problem today.
Okay, well, just to address that, without a DeLorean and a time flux capacitor, we really can't solve that problem because we can't go back in time and undo what was done. But in serious, and I don't mean, I'm not poking fun at you, but the statute reads that it requires that the city, in this case, has to just approve a plan, policy, or procedure to provide the appropriate levels of infrastructure services. So there's 2 things there. You have to read this. This doesn't mandate that the city actually provide the services or any services. It requires that a plan be adopted, which we have, a policy or procedure, and then there's the term appropriate level of services. So when we say when that wording is used, all it's saying is that in the city's discretion, what's the appropriate level of service? So we provide city services at the appropriate level, meaning fire, police, garbage, maybe water, maybe not, maybe sewer, maybe not. What's the appropriate level based on a policy decision that the council makes? So I would suggest that the city, 30, and again, I can't speak for what happened 30 years, Blair can't even speak for what happened on the city council 30 years ago. But I would suggest that it wasn't that what happened by not providing sewer to that area wasn't a omission or an obligation on the part of the city. It was simply, what's the plan? And what's the appropriate level of service? So there's sort of two things that the city had to do. And apparently at some point, somebody decided that the appropriate level of service did not include sewer at that time. But at the same time, I think once when, again, and this is sort of off topic of, because we're talking policy for new construction now, not existing construction. I think you have policy.
We're moving into.
We're moving into that. So when Glenn gets to that, but I would just say that if Glenn gets into that, I would just say that at some point there's going to be a policy direction from this committee to the council that deals with existing construction that's on septic tank. And fairness, I guess, is a policy consideration, not necessarily a legal consideration. That, is it equitable or fair to now require people who have been on septic tanks for 30 years to now connect to city sewer? And in a sort of society, you look at individual rights and you balance those with the greater good. And that's the policy decision. Again, going through those policies is if a policy recommendation from this committee to the council is, yes, it is good policy to require existing construction to connect to city sewer once that line's in front of their house. If that's good policy, then you refine that policy into specific regulation or city code to say when and how that happens. Within a certain time period, within a certain financial situation, or whatever that, how you refine that is kind of the next step. But if this committee, the council says that's not good policy, let's just leave septic tanks on existing construction as it is, that's the policy that we need to make, and then none of the other refinements have to happen. Okay, so.
Thank you, Jim, for bringing it up. We'll move forward. Now what?
We're taking copious notes. We're going to integrate your comments into the
Okay, good.
policy. So that, believe it or not, that was probably the easier part of what we're going to talk about, as several of you have alluded to. Now we're going to move on to existing homes. Existing homes that are there that use a septic tank connecting to sewer. So there are two scenarios under which existing homes would potentially connect to sewer. One would be where there are mains that already exist that are adjacent or abutting the property. So the policy would read, existing homes that receive city water using a septic tank that are adjacent and abutting a sewer main would be required to connect to city sewer. So the pros of that are that sewer main is constructed, it's already there and ready for connection. The owner's cost is solely for connection to the main. Owners with existing water service agreement or historic agreements already have a requirement to connect to sewer. As I mentioned, with new construction for the last 5 to 7 years or potentially longer, water service agreements have had requirements for connection to sewer. It also meets the goal and the mission of the commission to recharge to the extent possible to the aquifer and to protect the environment of our creeks and streams. The cons of this policy are that potential long-term ongoing impacts to the environment and little to no recharge to the aquifer. In addition to that, owners would now be required to pay a monthly sewer utility bill. Now I can either pause here, Mr. Chairman, or I can go into the options. Staff has provided a list of scenarios under which someone would be required to connect. And obviously there are pros and cons to all of those options. Those were on your questionnaire from our August discussion. And some of them, as a result of this discussion, could be eliminated from the list. We do have 6 options under this policy statement as to the timing of when the connection would be required. Would you like to pause at the policy, or would you like me to go into the options?
Well, for however you get through the day, you probably should go ahead.
Just go ahead. Okay.
Because I think this is something that is why we're here, the crux of the thing is picture. And I think by laying it out and maybe having people think about it, it's gonna have to come back in a subsequent meeting for us to be able to digest what you're gonna give us now.
Absolutely.
So let's take that right now, listen to it, then we'll formulate questions. And if we need to bring it back at another meeting, we will.
Okay. So option A is that connection to sewer would be no later than 18 months from adoption of the new sewer connection code.
Let me take this one real quick. Go ahead.
My brain hurts.
Quick question. I know we've been talking about the 2,400 homes. This isn't those 2,400 homes. These are ones where you have a septic or a line in place. Do you know how many homes fall into this category where there's a line near them already and they're using septic? Do you have a number in mind already?
And I apologize, we do not have that number yet, but we are working with Carvalho Engineers, and that's a number that we will probably have for you in late November, early December.
Okay, go ahead.
So the number 6 is the more cogent policy. Do you think it would be smart just to go on to 6 and then come back to 5?
I'll leave that up to the chairman.
Well, let's just go ahead and read through them. So everybody
Okay.
knows exactly what's on there. And then we can open them for discussion. We'll do that.
All right, so option A is that connection to sewer shall be no later than 18 months of adoption of a new sewer connection code. The pros of that are that all homes that are adjacent or abutting a sewer main will connect, which will meet the mission and goals of the commission. The cons of that are that it may be cost prohibitive to pay all costs up front, and financing mechanisms are likely to be needed to pay these costs over time. And also another con is enforcement of the required connection within the 18-month period. Option B is that connection to sewer would occur when the property is sold and ownership is transferred to a new owner. The pros of that are that all homes adjacent to or abutting a sewer main would eventually connect to sewer. The cost would be absorbed into the cost of a purchase of a home with no cost to the existing homeowner now. The cons of that are that connection to sewer could be slow, or it may not be realized for a long period of time. The other con is that there would be filing of instruments against properties at the county recorder's office. Option C is that connection to sewer would occur when the sewer usage increases as a result of a new building addition or an increase in sewer usage. The pros of that are that the cost can be absorbed into the total cost of a building addition project. However, on the con side, it could also deter owners from building additions or improvements to their homes due to this added cost. Additionally, connections to sewer could be slow or not realized for a long period of time. We're halfway through. Option D is connection to sewer shall occur within a specific time frame. The pros of that are that guaranteed connections would be made by a date certain. The cons of that is the enforcement of a required connection, and also what time frame is truly reasonable. Option E is connection to sewer shall occur when an existing septic system is over 15 years old. The pros of that is that, again, the owner would eventually connect in the future. The cons of that are that connection to sewer could be slow or not realized for a long period of time, as well as the ability to enforce the requirement for connection. And the last option is that connection to sewer would occur when an existing septic system fails. The pros of that are that an opportunity for an owner to connect to sewer when the septic system does fail, there would be an opportunity for the owner to connect. The con would be that the city would require an intergovernmental agreement with the county related to septic permits. The cost of connecting to sewer may be more than replacing or partially replacing, if they only need to replace the leach field, a septic system. And finally, the connections to sewer could be slow or not realized for a long period of time. Mr. Chairman, those are all of the options under policy statement number 5, which again reads, existing homes receive city water using a septic tank that are adjacent and abutting an existing sewer main will be required to connect to city sewer.
Okay, you just had a couple minutes and make some big statements, so.
It's a lot.
And I understand it's a lot. I guess the point being is, I would ask how you want to take this, as somebody that's working up the format. Do you want us to take them individually?
I think it would be helpful if we went option by option and got a consensus of the commission one way or the other, whether those options should remain in the proposal or be removed from the proposal.
Okay, so I think for the sake of time, we look at all the options and get a consensus from the committee, whether we want that to be hashed out further. Because there's a lot to think about when you start looking about the pros and the cons.
Yes.
And I typically focus on the cons because the whole reason why we're here is to have pros. So, yes, Sandy, go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess what I would like to know from the committee members, like City Attorney Palladini said, what do we feel is this good policy or not? I'd like to know a yay or a nay from our committee.
On each one of these?
Well, particularly 5, but I think we should know that on each one of the policies before we leave today.
Okay, so we want to just say, do we, as a committee, think policy number 5 in general as it's written is a good policy? And then you want to break those down?
If you're okay with that.
I'm okay with that. I mean, I think we have to start somewhere, and nobody told me where to start and where to stop. So the overall policy, I would support the overall policy because I think that's why we're here. Anybody disagree with that out there? Hands up. Okay, so for the overall sake of the policy, I think it remains to go to council that way.
I had a
Refine
suggestion.
each one of those. Okay, go ahead.
Obviously, we have to have a policy for 5 because there's going to be that situation. I would think that it would behoove us to just each of us say which of the policies we like best, and then maybe that'll eliminate discussing all of them.
Okay.
Options or policy?
Options, excuse me.
We'll go down to the options now.
Or like give your top 2, like which 2 do you like? Or what's your 2 favorites? And if we get everybody's 2 favorites, there's probably some we don't even need to discuss, and that would probably save time.
Brent, can we take them option by option and everybody yay or nay? We can do it that way. It's a little more organized than everybody saying.
I know that when you want to
So-
organize stuff.
It helps Carrie keep track a little bit better.
I think that's a fair way to do it because, sitting here and looking at them on the board, you forget what each one of them is.
Right.
So it's hard to just say, I like this one, I don't like that one. So let's take each one of them and we support it with a yes or no.
So option A is that connection to sewer shall be no later than 18 months of adoption of the new sewer connection code.
I like that. It gives people an opportunity.
Are there any nays?
I have a nay. I think it's requires too short a time period.
Okay. I would have said the opposite. I'd say it's too much of a time period, but that's all right.
I know. I'm sorry, go ahead.
A question.
Jim Hazelbaker.
Okay.
Mr. Hazelbaker, go ahead.
He was a nay.
Oh, he's a nay? Okay.
Are we talking under ponds, liens put on each property as the mechanism?
So what the lien is part of the financing piece. So we'll be talking about that next month. The policy is whether we would require connection within 18 months of the adoption of the new policy or the new code.
So for the sake of Carrie being able to understand, we don't need to say yes if you agree with it. Just give us a hands up or a no if you do not like it. So I,
Are we agreeing with all? I don't understand how we're going to do this. We're going to say no, 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 yes, no, or I mean, how do we get the ones that we like the best? If we say yes to everything, then how do we distinguish what's our favorite or not? I don't understand. There, you got yeses on everything. There's no distinguishing what's the most favorite of your yeses. I don't understand how we're going to get there.
well, we're looking at the first one, and I've heard there's like 5 that say yes and 2 that say no.
That means it would be okay, but I mean, what if we say okay to, if everybody says yes to everyone, then we're no better off. I don't understand where we're going.
Well, let's go through them and see where we end up. I think some will rise to the top.
Okay.
As we could discuss.
I agree with what you're saying, Mike, but I think we need to take this exercise real quick.
Okay, we can do it.
So for option B, connection to sewer would occur when the property is sold and ownership is transferred.
I agree with that.
I'd say that would be acceptable to me.
Is there anybody that's not acceptable to it?
On no, do you have any online no's?
Mark lets know.
Who's a no, Sandy?
Sandy.
Okay, I knew that.
Option C, connection to sewer would occur when the sewer usage increases as a result of a new building addition or an increase to sewer usage.
I disagree with that. Okay, there's 3. Anybody else?
Any no's?
Just a quick comment. Most, in my experience with septics, when they have a problem, they want to have to increase it, they skip the project. That's my experience in real estate. So I think I'm going no with that because I don't think people will go for that. They'll just skip the project because it doubles the cost of putting a room on.
Any more no's on the line?
Jim has a statement.
Go ahead, Jim.
No,
Okay, so I would
So
hear
that's
5 no's,
Oh, 6
6 no's, okay.
So 7 no's.
7 no's.
That's easy.
I guess that really rose
That
to the
ruled
bottom.
that one out. All right. Option D, connection to sewer shall occur within a specific time frame, and if so, we need to know what that time frame might look like.
Well, A was 18 months. So is it different than 18 months?
I would make the assumption it would be different than 18 months, yes.
But we don't know. So it's hard to, it's like you're.
I don't like this one because again, I'll go back and say the whole idea is to get them off. Go back to the mission statement one more time. We need to put a defined time frame. And I think 18 months is more than ample time for a homeowner or lot owner to understand what their financial ramifications are and how to handle their own financial hookup fees. So I would disagree with this one.
Well, I would say strike it all.
Yes, this one.
Mark also disagrees.
Okay. You sure you disagree? Anybody, you disagree, Sandy?
Jim Hazelbaker disagrees.
Hazel Baker? I do.
Yes.
7 no's.
7 no's for that one. So option E is that connection to sewer shall occur when the existing septic system is over 15 years old.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, most of
I
those
vote.
be at least 15 years old.
I vote no, only because that's not the industry. 15 years isn't necessarily, I mean, they say cement ones are good for 40 and 30 and 40. So 15 is like the shortest life any of them, any septic installer would ever say a system would last. So it seems like an arbitrarily low number.
And I would have to say, we probably need to clarify a septic system or a leach line. That's where your failure is going to come. It's not in your concrete tank, it's going to be in your leach lines. So I would probably agree that I don't think there's a set time frame when a system fails due to the type of material that it might be in, whether it's sandy or whether it's caliche soil or rock soil. I mean, if it's in rock soil, it may never fail.
Well, let me just clarify that option E is not about septic failure. Option E is about the age of a septic tank. We're going to get to the failure next. So don't.
I would say no on this one. Go ahead, Mr. Palladini.
So I think.
Here he comes.
I think what Gwen's point is it's about the amortization of the cost of the septic tank. And
Okay.
that's where the 15 years came in. So you basically have paid for it over the 15 years, or you amortize the cost over 15 years, not whether it could last 40 or 20 or 25. It's, you've kind of, it's like your refrigerator. It might last 20 years. Nowadays it lasts 4, but you know, you've kind of gotten your money's worth out of the purchase, and now you want to replace it. So that's, I think that's what that 15 years has been calculated on. It's kind of an amortization issue.
Cost rather than life.
Yes.
I'd leave it in there then. I can understand that. Any no's? You might want it out.
I just think it's too arbitrary. I think people would have a problem because their systems may be working just perfect after 15 years. So that no sense give them an arguing point. So I'd say no.
And I think that of all these, that would probably be the hardest one to enforce and keep track of. So it would be a nightmare for staff to
Counting
regulate
nightmare.
that. I would go back and change my mind and say I would disagree with this one. How about any?
Mark Natupsky, do you?
I disagree as well. I think it's too difficult to enforce.
Jay?
Well, it would be horribly hard to enforce.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, in some points, you wouldn't even know with our realtor sitting out there, you wouldn't even know that the property had sold and that tank, how old it was in the ground. I mean, it comes with a lot of burdensome proof to the city that it's 15 years old. So I would say, I would absolutely say no.
It's not always the septic part, it's
Yeah.
the leach lines.
You're a no? Who's a no?
Yeah. Well, the real estate has a 1% fee and they could fix the septic. They do it in the last 3 days of the transaction. So it would be a mess to try to do this at the end of a real estate transaction. You got to not deal with it.
Are you yes or no?
No.
Our neighborhood just replaced a lot of septic systems. That's what I'm afraid of here we're gonna get.
Again, 15 years from now, we're not gonna know how old that tank is because there's no way to track it.
Right, but I'm just trying my best to bring my neighborhood into agreement with the public.
Right, okay. Because overall, I think you have, Millie's okay with it. We have 6 no's. Okay,
No,
thank you, Jim. Okay,
All right. So the last option is that connection to sewer shall occur when an existing septic system fails.
I vote yes. That seems to be the standard around the country where people are doing these conversions. The cities usually come up with this one as their one that they can get through.
again,
That's why I say yes.
an intergovernmental agreement with the county so that they don't issue a new permit upon failure, especially if there's a sewer line in front.
How do you determine failure? What, we would have to specify failure?
Yeah, that the septic systems, when they do a real estate check, they have to identify any problems with the system, and they have good. They have the one that usually comes up is acceptable with like it might need a little pipe work or it might need a septic line, and then the third one is the tank has failed. So it's usually the tank has failed is the one the other cities adopt as their mode of forcing the hookup. That's what seems to be around the country.
And that's one way to address it. Another way is that Yavapai County receives complaints and or concerns from people in the neighborhood when there's water coming out. So then we would get that information from the county that they've identified that there has been a failure on a system. So,
Again, I think that's one that's the whole reason why we're here is to identify getting rid of the septic tanks. And I think this is a primary way to do that as well. Yes, Billy.
Okay, when the septic system fails, I think I agree with Mrs. Orr, because is it any problems? We have failure not only of the septic tank, but of the leach field. So can we be more specific on septic systems? I mean,
I guess you could
I'm
add,
not,
both of them in there because ultimately you're trying to take
right,
the septic systems with the leach field tied to them out of the system. Now I could have a house on a hill and somebody gonna say, did you have a failure in your tank? And I said, no, my tank works great. But down the road at Jane's house, there's a big pile of green smelly stuff right below my house in the bar ditch. And they're getting a county complaint. And yes, there is a failure. Just because you have fractured rock and your leach lines are in fractured rock and they don't back up or don't clog your system up, does not mean you don't have a failure.
And it is no, we cannot separate it apart and say tanks, leach field, such.
It's
It
one
is a
system.
septic system.
Yeah.
Whether it is tank, leach field, alternative system, is any part of it. If it fails, then it is time to get it on sewer.
And who determines the failure? The city?
No, it generally would be, by county.
The health
And or by Mr. Green said that they do checks on them through sales process. So that would be two potential ways that it would be identified that there has been a failure issue.
Yes, Eddie.
Thank you, Chairman. So here's a devil's advocate, and this happens quite often. Leach lines fail. We know the fractured rock, we know all of that. They're not required to have any sort of report filed or any sort of inspection. All they do is call an appropriate licensed plumber who can come and repair those leach lines in a matter of seconds.
And they don't have to have a permit to do so?
They don't even have to have a permit to do so.
No.
So
So it
there's
may-
that little triangle.
It may be more difficult to realize connection to sewer through septic failure, but I think option A and option B are also going to flesh out quite a number of opportunities for connection. For example, option B has to do when the property is sold. So as Mr. Green was explaining, he has to disclose the condition of the tank, but he's also going to have to disclose that because the ownership is changing, that particular property would change because the ownership would be changing, not because the septic system failed. So I think if it appears, and I don't mean to take over your meeting, but it appears that option A, B, and F are the three that the commission would like to explore a little bit further.
Sounds good to me because I think you're correct. And for the record, I do not want to be a septic tank inspector, just so you know.
Okay, and we're getting close to time, so if it would be okay, I'll move on to the final policy.
So can we expect as a committee that we will fine tune those three
We will,
and
and
bring those back for a discussion item?
we'll have additional discussion now that we've narrowed that scope down.
Okay,
Thank you for the input on that.
thank you. And go ahead.
Okay, so the final policy has to do with existing homes connecting to new sewer mains. So this would be construction of new sewer mains in areas that do not have sewer now. The policy would read that an existing home that receives city water using a septic tank that is not adjacent and abutting a sewer main will be required to connect to city sewer at the completion of or as a part of new sewer construction, regardless of the age of the existing septic system. The pros of that are that the city would realize a return on investment for new sewer mains through utility rates, the recharge to the aquifer and protection of the environment. And again, all new water service agreements are already required to connect to sewer. The cons of that are that those that don't connect to sewer at the time of construction may pay a higher connection fee in the future, depending on the financing mechanism. The potential long-term ongoing impacts to the environment and little to no recharge to the aquifer from septic systems is also a con. And finally, owners would be required to pay a monthly sewer utility bill. For this policy, we have two options for when connection would be required. Option A would be connection to sewer would occur when the new sewer is constructed. The pros to that are that connection costs may be lower due to the economy of scale and the contractors on site building the infrastructure. The cons to that may be that it might be cost prohibitive to pay all cost up front, and financing mechanisms will likely be needed to pay for this infrastructure over time. Option B is that connection to sewer shall occur within 18 months of the completion of sewer construction. The pros to that are that it allows the owner time to plan financially for connection to the sewer main. And the cons to that are that connections may be delayed the full 18 months due to cost, as well as connection costs could be higher depending on the financing mechanism and enforcement of the required connections. And before you get into the discussion, I think it's noteworthy to share with you that I've been doing quite a bit of research on sewer connections in the history of the city. And as far back as the 50s and the 60s, the city has been building sewer mains and requiring connection to sewer main within 18 months of the construction of the sewer main in those areas where it's newly built. So I just wanted to share with you that I thought it was interesting that is the time frame that's historically been used, which is why you see it here in the proposal. But we're of course open to other timeframes if the commission feels that another time frame would be more reasonable.
I just want clarification that within this policy that we have here, that once that sewer line is in place, whether the property hooks up to sewer right away or 18 months, they immediately began paying a sewer bill on that property.
So that was one of the proposals that Mr. Woodfill brought before the commission last month, but we'll be discussing that in November. That is one of the options that we're proposing.
Okay, that's what I want to know. Go ahead.
I really like the part where you said the city brings the sewer into the subdivisions and the homeowners then connect. We're not paying for the main sewer.
And we'll be talking about that in November. That is also one of the proposals that Mark Woodfill brought.
Well, ultimately, you might be, because what's going to happen is if you decide that you're in that area that you're talking about, and you decide not to hook up for 18 months, you're going to start, if everybody agrees to it and the council agrees to it, to start paying a sewer bill every month, even if you're not hooked up to it.
Right, which would give you incentive to hook up.
Absolutely it would, because the whole idea is going back to the mission statement, to take houses off of septic systems.
Right, because this is different than before where they were going to make us pay for the new sewer.
You are correct that in 2008, when sewer connections were discussed in North Prescott, the proposal was that the homeowners would pay for not only the sewer mains, but also the connections. You are correct.
I won't speak for all the council, but I will say that the direction is, and Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, to the city manager in my conversation, is that every year we as the city will put a package together in the budget that will look at certain sewer improvements that will be paid for by the city of Prescott. Is that a fair statement, Mark? Uh-oh. When he starts getting up, you know he said something wrong again.
That has been discussed, and again, we're going to talk about this all in November in more depth, but just as a reminder, we keep saying the city, it's the other ratepayers that we're wanting to pay for sewer in addition to their neighborhood, sewer into unsewered neighborhoods. So it's a tax on the other ratepayers. Yes, it was discussed as part of the budget that we would try to extend this. Obviously, this is a multi-decade process because there's a lot of unsewered areas and a lot of costs.
But I do want everybody to understand that's how Prescott has evolved, where it's like education, everybody's paid for something in the front and something in the rear. It's not all just about us. Yeah.
Question. I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Why are we not looking at the other options like option B and option F for the policy 6? Because that's the one where we got the 2,400 homes involved. And that's how in all the places you look at around the country, B is F is the option I see most often come in. B is a good option. Why aren't those being included in policy 6 that were included in policy 5? Why wouldn't those be considered as opposed to the two options you gave us?
When you have an answer.
So the reason that we didn't include them, and the commission certainly has the right to include them if that's what they want to do. But it was felt that through the discussions we've had already, that when the city brings new sewer, there has to be there has to be a way to recover those costs back to those ratepayers that Mark Whitfield is talking about. And for sewer to sit there and not be connected or to not have connections might not be favorable to the rest of the council. And so we
Yeah.
can bring
So
those.
then you are looking at requiring people who, in that case, who have, I have a neighbor that just put a brand new home, 1 year old, $20,000 system. And I mentioned this to him and he had 2 words. He said, unpaid mandate, it's like, he's got a brand new system. So all the people in here, it isn't when their property sells, although about 50% of the properties in my neighborhood have sold in the last 8 years. That seems like a good option to some people. And also if their system fails, they would be required to hook up. I don't think they're opposed to paying a small fee, sewer fee, but to come up with the 2008 estimate of $10,000 on a 25-year payout, and then having to pay 5, 6, 7 or whatever it's going to cost to get their line from their current place, replumb their house, landscape back to there. Nobody's too excited about that being forced on them on an immediate 18-month basis. I have lots of people with fixed incomes in this neighborhood. I don't care how many you give them 18 months, it's not going to change their financing. They don't, 50% of the people don't have 400 extra bucks. So when they're coming up with extra 5 out of their pocket, plus another $100 a month. And then some of them are already, the other guy's paying $120, $130 a month on a mortgage for his $20,000 system. So unless you're looking at those options, I don't think you're going to get much approval. I had 26% approval the last time you did this for the system going in. So I don't know what to take to people. If you're requiring it right up front, they're not going to be too excited. They might be if they sold their house, and they might be if their septic system failed and they have to incur the cost. That seems more palatable to in section 6 than what you're offering. I think it should be included in the possibilities that we discuss.
Go ahead, Jim. Jim, go ahead. Hello, Jim.
Yes,
Go ahead, Jim.
I think we need to discuss, this is what I've been talking about since we started this commission. I think it's going to determine how many people you get on our side to do this with the financing and how it's going to be done, so that, as the gentleman before me just said, there's a lot of people up here that are retired too, as I am. And when you tell them you got to come up with $6, $8, $10, $12, $15,000 in 18 months, that can put a hell of a hardship on people. And what the city is willing to come up with in financing to make this palatable to everybody up here, 441 homes, is going to determine whether we get them on our side or they just say, no, I'm going to go to court.
Well, we still have, that threat of court isn't the least. We have got to make a decision. Either we get done with this now and just say we're through, because I've been working on this for 20 years. So either people suck it up and say we're doing it for the right reasons, and that's to take septic systems off, like you, Jim, or whoever might be out there bringing in selling real estate and bringing up the fact of what they do elsewhere in the world. This is Prescott, Arizona. It's not elsewhere in the world. Either we challenge what we're doing by doing it. We have to have a sound policy first of what we've been talking about today. And then the financial part, Jim, you're right. That's got to come at the next meeting. But we're not going to get half the people that live in North Prescott to agree with anything. And I already know that. So, and I think you probably know that as well. So I think the bottom line is we have to get the policy set in place first. And then we have to talk about the financials and what the city's going to do as far as main lines and what the hookups might be and how long it takes to pay for those. But we have to have a policy first.
I think I can assure the commission that this won't be the last time we talk about this. We're gonna talk about the financing piece next month. And then in December, we're gonna look at potential projects through Carollo's report that they're pulling together for us, as well as numbers in what areas and answer some of these questions that you're asking us so that you have a holistic and comprehensive view. But the feedback we're receiving today is excellent because it gives us an idea of what direction we should be headed as staff to assist you in completing the policy. So we'll probably be looking at this policy holistically, the policy, the financial policy, and the project list again in January or February. So rest assured, we'll be talking about this again, and hopefully as we proceed to give you additional information, it helps you formulate your opinions.
Gwen, thank you. I think we're long, so I'm gonna have you wrap it up. But what I want to do really quick is make everybody understand that this isn't the last time we're going to talk about this. What we've done today is help staff fine tune things that we don't want to go to and things that we do. Therefore, giving them a better idea to research those different things and bring them for more conversation. Yes, Carrie.
We have one more item.
Okay.
Today, and that is that we need to change our dates for the November and December meetings because our meeting date falls on council meeting days. So the November meeting will be held on Wednesday, November 18th at 9:30 a.m. in the police department training room, which is on Marina. I'll get the address out. And then December meeting will be Wednesday, December 19th at 9:30 here in council chambers.
Okay, and for everybody out there listening, that's the third Wednesday of both those months. The first one in the council training room and the second one in December, right here in the council chambers. Did that cover pretty much everything that you wanted to lay out for this agenda? I know it was long, but you know, they bring these things to me and I look at them and I go, oh no, this is gonna take a while. But we gotta get them out there. We gotta talk about them. We have to digest what we heard today, formulate our opinions for the next meeting and come back with ideas and things that we may have not thought about. Yes, Sandy.
Thank you, Chairman. One quick question for Gwen on policy 6. Would those homeowners not know if the sewer was in the 5-year capital plan as well, like policy number 4?
That's a good point, and we can add that to the list.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, Millie.
Okay, I would like one to put in the cons, the owners would pay a monthly sewer utility bill. So that it's just not a utility bill that catches them off guard.
Yep, I did say that out loud, but I'll amend it so it says that.
Okay, because there's 2 places.
Yep.
Okay, everybody out there, thank you for joining us today. It's always an hour and a half of pleasure. And we'll see you next month, third Wednesday of the month, 9:30 police training room, and have a great day. Bye now.